We're giving you a look into the secret strategies and tactics closely held by the biggest investment banks, private equity firms, and hedge funds. I'm Ben Summers, founder of Adagio Group and author of The Shadow Banker's Secrets, Investment Banking for Alternatives. This video series will take the power of capital creation from Wall Street to your Main Street, one secret at a time.
One of the key points in my development there was the conviction of saying, this is the place to be, right? I didn't look around to other people to say, hey, do you think hard money lending is a good business model? It was obvious, right?
That's what I meant at the beginning, is that's your common sense, my friend. See, that's what I love about you. You know, you can have all the knowledge base in the world. You can have all the fundamentals and analytics, but you need that. You do need all that, but you need that coupled with common sense, and that's what you did during the last crash, and that's what you've done ever since, to me.
It's interesting. I think about this a lot, and we can talk about sort of my evolution on the marketing side at some point. But you call it common sense. Fair statement. But if you dive into that a little bit further, it's shocking the number of people who would be considered wildly intelligent, right? Like by all objective measures, whether it be IQ test or academic credentials or otherwise, they're off the charts. But there's something else going on in their mind that's a little bit different. And the way I would describe it is they prioritize other people's perspectives. They prioritize the influence of their peers more than they value their own judgment.
You know what I think the one word I would put for it, when I was just thinking when you were saying that, is fear.
Sure.
And most people act out of fear. And again, to take it full circle with where we're going in today's conversation, for me, that's the whole purpose of this call, is to eliminate that fear. Because, I mean, it's just like when, the pandemic first hit, March 2020, I hadn't bought a stock in 10 years. But I got a TD Ameritrade account. I bought stock in every airline I could, every hotel I could, casinos, whatever, cruises, because it was clear to me to do the opposite of the hysteria that was going on, just like it was for you in 2005 to 2008, to kind of go against the grain. And that's why I call it common sense. But you're right, it's more than just common sense. It's about having a comfort that there's a plateau that things follow. And ultimately, it comes back to the mean, and that's what you really built, is to simplify that for people. They can kind of piggyback on the work you've done to already figure that out. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's a fair statement. And maybe even extrapolating on that a little bit further, I can kind of sympathize to some extent, right? So on the one hand, my lack of a traditional path has created unique challenges for me. But this highlights an example of where it was an asset. Can you imagine if you spent your entire life studying from private preschool, right, all the way through private high school, going through an Ivy League education, maybe another Ivy League MBA, you land that position at Goldman, you work there for years, right? You have been indoctrinated, right? And your entire life's work has been built upon this social dynamic. And it is a social dynamic, right? Like, why would you just fuck that off, right? And say, I'm going to do my own thing. You know what I mean? Like,
it's true. No, and that's what I love about it. I mean, that's why we've kind of joked about it. People have called you kind of like the Rodney Dangerfield, in Caddyshack for the Wall Street crowd. If it is true, that's what you do. You take a sledgehammer to all of that nonsense. But it's true. Like, no, there's no way are you blaming. In my mind, I call those people the victims, because they've been indoctrinated their entire existence, and they're really smart people. It's not that anybody's dumb. It's just they haven't had access to this mindset. And that's what you do with what you teach, is you take a sledgehammer to that mindset, to that concept, and give people, hey, you know what? Maybe this works too. And then, those that have capitalized have done really well, right? So anyway.
Yeah. So, and to be clear, like, there are obviously very good and valuable things that come out of that, right? And so I'm utilizing a sledgehammer selectively, right? For lack of a better term, right? So I'm I'm quantitative finance, quantitative risk analytics, financial engineering, right? These are relatively esoteric skills that are used by every serious institution. I use them too. I don't take a sledgehammer to those. I glorify those.
But like a scalpel.
It may be a scalpel, right? But what tends to happen is groupthink, right? So like you move up into an organization, and maybe the agenda of that organization is not perfectly aligned with an idealistic pursuit of what should be done. And so maybe the policies of big firms that govern how an industry operates may start to skew how things should be done in favor of what they want to be done, considering their own interests, and then all of the people in their ecosystem just follow along. That's what I take a sledgehammer to. I take a sledgehammer to the bastardization of the merit-based approach that the institutions have gotten away with by virtue of their role in the market, right?
Yep.
And because I don't come from that world, it was very easy for me to not fear retaliation, because who's going to come at me? I'm surrounded by nobody, right? So at that time, right? So, but yeah, that's a good point. And I think one example of that, and I talked about identifying the hard money lending crowd as the place to be from a strategy perspective. Well, lending money is a labor-intensive exercise, right? So I knew I had to go raise money, and the discipline or the industry that's dedicated to raising money, well, that is what finance is by definition. So this is where my naivety kind of got the best of me. So I knew what I knew on the real estate side at this point. I saw what the hard money lending guys were doing, and I saw that traditional finance people knew nothing about this stuff, right? And I was like, oh, this is a layup. I'll just tell the finance people about the hard money lending stuff. I'll be the conduit. Game over, right? Like,
but then, can I just touch on
Sure.
this? Isn't it like insane looking back on, like 2020 hindsight, whatever, but isn't it insane looking back on it and like things that are so obvious now that like high level professionals didn't know in 2008?
Yeah. It's all about cultural inertia, right? Like, when is it okay to start talking about things, right? I mean, Tony Robbins, for one thing, he writes finance books on occasion, which I find somewhat comical. But in one of his more recent finance books, he actually talks about hard money lending as an option, right? His two prescriptions are index, and then alternatively, you can be a hard money lender in the real estate space. But even that being said, still there is a tremendous knowledge, cultural, expertise divide between real estate and finance. When you talk about real estate's an asset class, and it's arguably becoming a traditional asset class. I mean, since 2012, when Blackstone started buying up everything off the street, it's pretty mainstream now. But even so, they're divided arbitrarily, and I think it's a function of licensing. Right? For example, like securities people need a certain set of licenses. Real estate people need a license. And they're just two different sandboxes that just aren't predisposed to communicate. So real estate people don't know anything about finance, and finance people really don't know anything about real estate outside of what's kind of like exchanged amongst the zeitgeist, right?
Yeah, that's true. I can attest to that, just being your friend as a real estate guy. Yeah, anyhow.
Yeah, right there. So what this effort of trying to raise money to lend as a hard money lender, which evolved into creating a fund and then trying to raise money to that fund and eventually evolving into an investment bank, that process has been over a decade plus labor of simply providing communication between real estate and finance, right? And now I've evolved to, we're asset class agnostic now. I cut my teeth in real estate. That's where I started. Hard money lending is great. It was great. It always will be great to some extent. But now we work with any asset class, and we've moved out of fund management on an individual level or managing our own strategy as an asset manager to financial engineering and capitalizing other asset managers regardless of their asset class if their performance is good enough. And so that's where our focus is today. So right now, the finance industry is preeminently concerned with pitching and trading equities, right? The whole broker-dealer space gets paid on commission for trades. trillions of dollars of wealth are vested in equities markets and fixed income markets, liquid fixed income markets. And so the entire financial services industry is vested on selling that stuff. And I'm saying, okay, let's take that agenda, let's move that agenda out of the way for a second, and let's just say, let's try to evaluate what is the best investment, absolutely, in a vacuum, regardless of asset class bias. And that's where we sit today. So it doesn't matter what the underlying asset class or strategy is. All we're looking at is capitalizing the best performance available. And that's measured through the skills called quantitative risk analytics, risk-adjusted performance measures. But we can touch on that a little bit later, I guess.